This is the end, my friend.
That's all, folks.
This ends here and now!
It's the end of the world as we know it.
Every story needs a beginning, middle, and, you guessed it, an ending. As the saying goes, a story is only as good as its ending. So then why in God's name do so many of them just never seem to end?
Kill me.
The answers may or may not surprise you. Everything in a well-written narrative should build up to a satisfying conclusion. However, thanks to the power of capitalism, stretching out well-known properties is now extremely common and profitable. As it turns out, most people don't want their favorite stories to end, and production companies are more than happy to cater to people's addictions. Now, some will rightly ask, is having my favorite show go on forever such a bad thing? And, well, it depends. But generally, the problem hinges on this. The longer a story goes on, the harder it is to keep its core message relevant. Keep in mind that stories don't necessarily have to be short. Some of the best stories span multiple movies, seasons, or books. Some still haven't ended, and some even end too soon. The point is, a story should be as long as it needs to be. No more, no less. Please, stop. Just stop. I'm begging you. How often have you heard a friend pitch a show with the side note, just watch the first season or two, or get the original and avoid everything that came after? A common cause for this issue is having a finished story become ruined by popular demand to revive and continue it indefinitely. They take the core message and throw it out the window for the sake of No matter how much fans want to see their favorite story go on, giving in to this demand rarely ever leads to a satisfactory continuation. And the reason for this is simple. Good stories build up to something. What often happens when an already complete story is revived is that it lacks the foundation for wherever it goes next. There are many examples of this, but few of them rival what is possibly the greatest example of fan service gone wrong in storytelling history. Avatar: The Last Airbender. One reason Atla is such a widely beloved story partly comes down to a well-defined end goal. Defeat the Fire Lord before the comet arrives. This premise was revealed early in the first season, and wouldn't you know it, the final episodes deal with fighting the Fire Lord as the comet appears. The whole show built up to this moment, and once this conflict was resolved, the story ended.
But what if it didn't end?
Enter the Legend of Korra.
I'm the Avatar! You gotta deal with it!
Much of Korra piggybacked off of The Last Airbender and didn't have all that much to offer itself other than nostalgia and J.K. Simmons' voice acting.
Don't bring my mother into this.
Now, to be fair, the first season wasn't horrible. The structure and overarching narrative was fine and had some merit, but the longer it went on, the less it made sense. Every following season seemed tacked on, resulting in story development that actively hurt world building and lore. And not just for The Legend of Korra, but for The Last Airbender as well. Now, there's nothing inherently wrong with spin-offs, but making a spin-off that reuses established characters for nostalgia's sake is a cheap way to pull people in. Speaking of nostalgia...
Oh, I have a bad feeling about this.
Star Wars in particular has somehow mutated into the freakish forever franchise we all know and love to hate. When it initially came out, even including the second trilogy, the scope was focused enough and easily understandable. But now it's impossible to see if these stories will ever end at all. Why? Because they don't want to create a situation where it can end. They will always leave a backdoor open because it's simply more profitable that way. This is how we end up with forgettable shows like The Bad Batch, Kenobi, The Mandalorian, etc. Even Game of Thrones is giving in to the greed now with the upcoming Snow, which is highly likely to end up like, oh, I don't know.
I never wanted it. You are my queen. I don't want it. You are my queen. I don't want it. You are my queen.
This isn't just a Hollywood problem either. The anime scene isn't doing much better with shows like My Hero Academia, Attack on Titan, Fooly Cooly, and many others continuing well past their expiration dates. Fooly Cooley in particular is an infamous example of smothering the excellence of an original series with spin-offs that no one asked for. Each of these shows started with a clear vision that either gets pushed back behind filler or replaced with another less interesting one. Keeping a conclusive ending in mind and sticking to it makes the message and themes of any story far more impactful. Strangely enough, by focusing on the ending, a story remains active and its components stay relevant. Almost every good story is tied around interesting character arcs. But when stories go on for too long, it often comes at the cost of character development. Characters are compelling because their journeys take them somewhere. And for their journeys to really matter, they should be left alone.
Give me something for the pain and let me die.
Writers for long-winded shows make characters learn the same lessons over and over again. Or worse, don't have the characters learn anything at all. If you're watching trashy sitcoms, that's one thing. But for shows attempting to actually go somewhere, it's depressing to see. The act of ending something is sending a statement in and of itself. You're saying,
Ladies and gentlemen, we've reached our destination. This is what we had to say.
And that act alone makes quite an impact. Cowboy Bebop, no, not that one, the good one, is still talked about by anime fans today, not just because of how it ended, but rather the fact that it did end. Bebop ran from April to June in 1998, and the only addition to the franchise was a movie in 2001, and that was it. Despite the cries for more, director Watanabe held his ground and chose to not extend the narrative because he, quote, didn't want the show to end up like Star Trek, end quote.
I see no reason to stand here and be insulted.
Of course, length doesn't immediately mean terrible. Shows like Black Sails and Breaking Bad had multiple seasons, but were still focused on an ultimate goal throughout. They didn't try and add some contrived other problem that springs up after the main plot concludes. They simply let it end according to plan, and that's a huge reason why they're remembered so fondly.
Shut the f*** up. Let me die in peace.
Sometimes a series ends too early, and it's not always by choice. And in some cases, a show might actually gain in popularity due to its brevity. Firefly is one such case, and is one of the most fondly remembered sci-fi series in television history, just like Bebop. The difference? Well, Firefly didn't choose to end. It was cancelled prematurely after one season. After cancellation, however, the show gained cult status and has since become a must-see in the sci-fi genre. In fact, the demand for a proper conclusion was so high, the follow-up movie Serenity was made to wrap things up. And it's not just Firefly. Pushing Daisies, Twin Peaks, and Teen Titans are other good examples of shows that ended early and all have dedicated communities to this day. All because they didn't overdo it. Would some of these shows have done better with more seasons? Maybe. But that's the core dilemma here. Do you leave the party early or stay past your welcome?
You either die a hero or you live long enough to see yourself become the villain.
Sequels and spin-offs have this wonderful habit of just recycling the story they're based on. Continuations can work really well, of course, as long as they bring enough new content. Sequels should be natural extensions of the original story, not cash grabs. Now, I hate to keep talking about Star Wars, but The Force Awakens was just a blatant remake of A New Hope. It might as well have been called a slightly newer Hope. Every character is a return of or replicas of existing characters and is given very little personality in the process. And what do they get up to? They go to planets that look exactly the same and fight the same type of people for the exact same reasons as in previous films. But Star Wars is hardly the only franchise to fall victim to repetition.
Hey, what did I just say?
Obviously, these franchises follow a formula they know to be profitable, at the cost of storytelling. But guess what? You can make good sequels that are also profitable! Tolkien showed the world how it's done when advancing from The Hobbit to The Lord of the Rings. The Hobbit was a self-contained story that introduced world building which The Lord of the Rings inherited and expanded on with sufficient new characters and objectives to make it original as well. Plus, the established characters continue to grow instead of just being thrown in for nostalgia's sake. When it comes to good spin-offs, on the other hand, they really just need to do one simple thing: stand on their own. The Marvel Universe has its own version of this problem. It started so well with Iron Man, but the moment this happened, they became obsessed with tying everything together. And by tying, I mean duct taping. Everything becomes a world-ending plot device, and the narrative is so convoluted at this point that it's getting increasingly difficult to care. Here's a simple question I wish every spin-off writer would ask themselves. Would a newcomer be able to grasp this story as well as an existing fan would? Obviously, fans being treated to details and nods to past works is all well and good, but the viewing experience mustn't rely on these things. That's why Into the Spider-Verse is my personal favorite of the Spider-Man takes. Spider-Verse works because they keep the same core concept but use a different approach and focus to draw in the audience. In fact, up until the most recent Spider-Man, each Spider-Man movie or show chose to stand on its own, rather than try and ride the same wave as previous works. At the end of the day, stories are often more compelling with a universe tailored to that story. That doesn't mean that there shouldn't be sequels and spin-offs, but if you're going to make them, for the love of God, just give them something unique to make them worthwhile. We just want something new.
What does the chef have that's new?
So what is that? What is new?
You?
Yes, what do I tell them?
Well, what did you tell them?
I told them I would ask.
What are you blathering about? Customers are asking what is new.
What should I tell them?
What did you tell them?
I told them I would ask.
To put this all bluntly, people don't like to see their favorite stories end, I get that. But if a story is truly good, it will live forever. All good things must come to an end, but remember, with the end comes closure, and this is ultimately where the satisfaction lies. Now this may come a little out of left field, but the Calvin and Hobbes comics have ascended far beyond every other comic of its era, in spite of some of them still continuing to this day. Author Bill Watterson himself said, quote, "By the end of 10 years, I'd said pretty much everything I'd come there to say. If I'd rolled along with the strip's popularity and repeated myself for another 5, 10, or 20 years, the people now grieving for Calvin and Hobbes would be wishing me dead, and I'd be agreeing with them." I think some of the reason Calvin and Hobbes still finds an audience today is because I chose to not run the wheels off it. I've never regretted stopping when I did, end quote. A production is often considered successful if it makes a lot of sequels or lasts many seasons. But really, shouldn't legacy and standing the test of time be the true sign of a successful story?
You serious?
Multiple reason why they remember fondly. As long as... Yeah. Alright, you're gonna say it. Okay. Speaking of Tolkien showed how... When advancing from the